Good evening, everybody, and we would like to welcome everybody here this evening. My name is Ed Lavore. I'm the principal of Holy Cross Catholic Academy, and we are here today. We welcome Dr. Jody Carrington, and we also welcome Ms. Christina Stalteri, who is part of our Catholic School Council this evening. And we invite Dr. Jody Carrington, who Christina will introduce in just a moment, to give us some very useful information that we can use for ourselves, for one another, for our families, and for our students as we continue to navigate through our current day and our current world. I'd like to begin, please. First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody who is joining us from Holy Cross. We also welcome those of you who are coming and joining us from other schools. We have 11 feeder schools to Holy Cross, and we did send out that messaging to all of our grade 8 families. So to those of you who are here this evening, thank you very much for joining us. We also sent it out to our own staff of over 100 teachers, EAs, EIs. So for those of you who are joining us here this evening, welcome to you as well. So I'd like to begin this evening, before passing it off to Ms. Stalteri, with an opening prayer, what we do every day here at Holy Cross. So let us begin with the sign of our faith in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Today we bring our intention. We continue to pray for our community of Holy Cross. We continue to pray for one another, for those in our families who perhaps may be ill at this time. We certainly pray for world peace throughout the world. And we certainly pray most recently for those children who perished in that awful tragedy in Texas. We pray for the repose of those souls, for those teachers who perished, and certainly for the families that grieve their loss. Loving God, help us to deepen our understanding of what it means to be rooted in prayer. Guide our feet to walk in the ways of Jesus. Help our hands create a welcoming and inclusive world. May your love inspire us and your light sustain us. We ask this in the name of your Son, who is here among us to remind us how to pray in the love of Christ as we gather in his name. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. And we are gathered on the ancestral lands and waters of all Indigenous peoples who have left their footprints on Mother Earth before us. We respectfully acknowledge those who have walked on it, those who walk on it now, and future generations who have yet to walk upon it. We pray to the Creator for strength and wisdom, that all may continue to serve as stewards of the earth. Ms. Stalteri, I'll pass it along to you. Thank you.
So we would like to welcome everyone to this parent engagement presentation brought to you by the Catholic School Council of the Holy Cross Catholic Academy. Tonight, we have Dr. Jody Carrington here to talk about building authentic relationships. Jody speaks passionately and humorously about resilience, burnout, mental health, leadership, grief, and trauma, and how reconnection is the answer to so many of the root problems we face. Dr. Jody Carrington is a psychologist, best-selling author, a public speaker with an affinity for helping people overcome human-centered problems. We are so grateful to welcome her with us tonight. Thank you for joining us, Jody.
Easy for you to say, Christina, huh? All of those things at one time. Oh, thank you so much for having me. It is so, I wish we were there in person, but we're going to jump right in because I know we got a short period of time tonight, but I'm just so grateful to sit with so many of you tonight. And I'm really grateful to Holy Cross for welcoming me. It's contagious, Christina. Did you see that? Across the lands of our beautiful country here tonight, because I'm in Alberta, really excited to watch a hockey game that's going to happen in an hour, because I went to the first round of the playoffs of the Toronto Maple Leafs hockey game. And I went to the very first game they played in Toronto this season. And you were one overtime goal away from being still in. I'm still very sad about that. So I'm sure many of you are too, or maybe you're not. But I'm so excited tonight. We're going to talk about relationships and connection and like uplifting things like trauma and like, are kids okay? And are they going to be resilient? here's what's going to happen. This is full disclosure because then you get to decide about all of these things. I'm going to rip your souls out and then I'm going to put them back together. So that's the first thing that are going to happen. And then I'm also going to, you should know I'm a child psychologist by training, but I'm not a huge fan of kids. I have 3 of my own, so I'm kind of coming around, but I much prefer the people who hold them. Because if us big people aren't okay, those little people don't stand a chance. And so we're going to talk a little bit tonight about how I don't think we are okay. And I think we're making a big mistake right now in the world of education. And I think for sure the responsibilities that we put on ourselves as parents to believe desperately, we want to believe desperately that our kids are going to be okay. And they're not. And I will tell you that because the effects of this pandemic are pretty significant and we're not talking about it. I think we make a big mistake sometimes when we say all the time, like, things are good. It's good. It's good. We're good. We're good. It's fine. You know what? We want to get back to normal. Okay. Like, the kids are fine. Oh my gosh. We love your kids. You love it. It's good. No, it's not. Many of us are barely friggin' hanging on. We want to throat punch everybody we see. We're wondering if we got the dementia. And I think you can't address what you don't acknowledge. You can't address what you don't acknowledge. And we're going to do that a little bit. So I promise you it's going to be a bit of a journey in our almost hour together tonight, where I'm going to sort of take you into this place of, is it bad? How much concerned do we need to be, keeping in mind, of course, that we're in Canada and we have significant amount of resources, in the context of what's going on in our great big world right now. But I think that what we really need to do is get into this place where we can understand a little bit around you can't address what you don't acknowledge. And so when we dip into this, just what do we have on our plates right now, then we're going to come up the other side and do this place of sort of understanding a little bit around what we do about it. So I promise you, y'all, I'll leave you tonight with a few things you can tuck into your back pocket to get connected and reconnected with your kids and your partners and your colleagues, because right now I think all of our relationships to some degree are suffering, and our data is really our data. I don't know whose data I'm talking about, but the data that I'm going to talk about tonight is really becoming more and more clear in that regard. So I'll share a little bit of that with you. So right now, I'll tell you, I grew up in a small town, and how I got into this psychology business is actually because of a teacher. And I was inspired so much by a teacher. I grew up in a small town called Viking, Alberta, Canada, which you can appreciate maybe in small town Ontario. It's not much different, but my school, the school that I was raised in, was a K-12 school. So I knew the first and last name of every teacher I had. I knew where they lived. My bus driver's name was Stan Chomick. He was a crushy old son of a gun, and I went to his funeral. I loved the guy because he picked me up every day from grade 3, dropped me home every night to grade 12. I remember in grade 10, there's 22 of us that started kindergarten together, and the same 19 of us that graduated together. So we knew everything about everything. And I think that what's interesting to me is in grade 10, I remember some of our teachers, and in particular, I remember Mrs. Holly Nordstrom, but I have no idea what she taught us. The literacy and the numeracy escapes me. But what I remember, and I go on to get a PhD, this is the interesting thing, but I do not remember the specifics of those things. I do remember how people made us feel. And I remember a day in particular where Mrs. Nordstrom was standing, the day she had to tell us that the then most popular kid in our class had been killed. I remember what she was wearing. I remember where she was standing. I had no idea what she said, but I remember how she made us feel. And I remember thinking in that moment, if the big people are okay, the little people are going to be just fine. Even as a 16-year-old kid, when there's somebody there to navigate big emotions, the little people are going to be okay. And it started to really occur to me, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I said to my dad, I think I know. I came home that night and I said, I think I know what I want to do. He said, do you want to be a teacher like Mrs. Nordstrom? I said, no, I don't like kids. And he said, which is still sort of true to this day, I said, I think I want to be a psychologist. And so I got into this work really searching for how you make people feel the way Mrs. Nordstrom made us feel that day. And so I did my master's and my PhD mostly around police psychology, because I was a civilian member with the RCMP in this country for 2 years. And I started to understand trauma and organizations and what it looks like when you don't look after your people. Particularly in our policing organizations, we do a really poor job of looking after first responders in this country, and we do an even worse job of looking after the people who hold them. Okay, there's not a single program for first responder spouses that is nationally recognized, and you are only as okay as the people who hold you. Okay, I'll tell you that again. You are only as okay as the people who hold you. So if your mama is sick, or your baby gets a diagnosis, or your husband has a fatal heart attack, you are only as okay, as productive, as connected in your communities as the people who hold you. Because it turns out we're wired for connection. We were never meant to do any of this alone. And part of the thing that we're up against right now is that we have never in the history of the free world been more disconnected than we are right now. And in the course of my training, I did my residency in Nova Scotia, and I started to do a rotation, spend more time with kids. They asked if I would do a rotation with kids, and I was like, no, listen, I'm not a fan. And they're like, listen, we think you'd be a good fit. You're kind of like one. And so I was like, you're not wrong. And I fell in love with the tiny humans, and I realized that we know even less about kids and trauma than we know about adults and trauma. And so I did a bit of a postdoc in child psychiatry, and I came back to Alberta and took my first job on a locked psychiatric inpatient unit at the Alberta Children's Hospital, which is sort of like the center of excellence for kids in this province. And what I learned about, in fact, the programs that I invested in was everything I learned about in grad school, which was really about managing behaviors of kids. Okay. And I think to this day, we are struggling significantly to work in a world of best practices, where those best practices were established for a world that no longer exists. We are parenting and engaging in this institution of education, justice system, largely across the globe in this way of interacting with humans that was established 2 generations ago. Okay. It basically based on what we learned from a rat and a pigeon. Okay. It's called behaviorism. And what happened when we were setting up best practices for parenting and for our interactions with kids across many institutions was we were like, you know what, we have a problem. We need to figure out how we help people, kids in particular, to be calm. We like it best when people are calm. And this is true. This is the part about kids and families that I wish I would have learned sooner. So I'll tell you it now. I don't know if I was absent or hungover or what was happening during this particular lesson of grad school, but this term, emotional regulation, was not something I ever remember being completely familiar with until I got to the Children's Hospital and I started to integrate into a multidisciplinary team where we started to talk about kids outside of behaviors. And here's the definition of emotional regulation, basically, okay? How not to lose your friggin' mind. If you are able to stay calm in times of distress, you will do well in this world, full stop, okay? We put a high emphasis in this culture, in this world actually, on emotional regulation. We love it when people are calm. We like it when you're using your words and making good choices and being kind. We like those things so much better than when people are losing their friggin' minds. And if we were in the same room right now, I'd say to you, anybody still married? Okay. If you are, we choose our partners because at one point in our lives, they had the ability to regulate us, to calm us in times of distress. And here's the deal. The longer you spend with somebody, if they're not okay, you're not okay. When in the history, and this is the interesting thing about it, right? We like it best. If you think about your partner, you like them best when they're calm. And we were all raised in this generation. In fact, if we were together again, I would say complete this sentence for me. Kids should be seen and not. If you were going to use the chat, maybe you would tell me this. If you could remember this in any ways. Oh, I wonder. Let me see. I'm in the private chat section. If we are in this place of being able to say kids should be seen and not heard, we all know that to be true. And we've known that to be true for a very long time. Now, we also don't like it when people are losing their minds. That's a definition of emotional dysregulation. And I will tell you, this is the job of little people. The job of little people is to actually lose their mind. And it reminds me, it doesn't just remind me, I have this quote that hangs over my shoulder, as you can see right here. This is like, I didn't even set this up this way, but here's the demonstration of the thing that matters most to me right now. I found this quote not very long ago by a philosopher named Ram Dass, and he said the most profound statement in the human language, I think, or the English language that I had ever heard. He said this: "We are all just here walking each other home. We are all just here walking each other home." And here is what's integral in this part of it. The job of big people is to do the walking. The job of little people is to lose their friggin' minds. And I'll give you an example of this. When you bring a baby home from the hospital, how do they let you know what they need? Again, this is the audience participation component, but because we don't have an audience, I'm going to just tell you the answer. They cry. They lose their friggin' minds. What is the job of big people? To walk them home. Okay. In fact, if I put a crying infant in your arms, regardless of where you're at on this globe, it is a universal exchange that would happen between big person and dysregulated baby. You would engage in a rhythmic exchange in an attempt to soothe. Shh. Okay. Now, if you're a soldier in Russia, if you are in Afghanistan or Singapore or Toronto or Vancouver or Halifax or Texas, if you have a crying baby in your arms and you are alone in particular, you will do your very best to regulate them. Okay. In fact, even when I put my own personal child into the arms of my husband. So my personal husband has a PhD in how to feed cows. Okay. Took me a while to land this guy. And when I did, here's what's interesting about him. He's got a PhD in how to feed cows, which I know is probably a big idea in Toronto, but I'll tell you what he does here in rural Alberta is he drives around in this pickup truck looking to see if heifers and steers are hungry. That's what he does. It's very exhausting, I'm sure, but he's a nice guy. He is more comfortable with cows than he is with kids. Okay, so when I remember watching the nurses put our firstborn son into the arms of my husband, he hung on to him as though you would have just pulled a calf. Okay, so there's a bit of a cradling motion that was happening here. But what I noticed instantly is he attempted to soothe our son by doing this. Okay, shh. Yeah. If you watch this with anybody, even if you've ever been on an airplane or in a grocery store and there's a baby that's crying, you watch what happens with everybody sort of that walks around, particularly women. We get into this engaging place of just wanting to help co-regulate that child. We're wired for it because, in fact, if we disconnect from infants, they die. The job, indeed, of little people. If you think about 0 to 2, how many times little kids, because they have no capacity to regulate emotion, they require the big people around them to walk them home. And the more connected and healthy and regulated we are, the more equipped we are to get them there, to get them back to this state that we so appreciate, this state of calm. And in fact, the more I do that for a tiny human in my home, in my care, the better I am equipping them at being able to do that when I'm not there. Dan Siegel calls this flipping their lid. Okay, so from a neurobiological perspective, he said you flip your prefrontal cortex out of the way, lose your friggin' mind. Well, the job of big people is to calm you and soothe you and regulate you. And the more times adults show you how to regulate emotion, you start to create neural pathways that you can then access when big people aren't there to regulate you. Okay. Now, you can well imagine if the big people that are surrounding kids are emotionally dysregulated themselves, overwhelmed, drunk, high, absent, come from multiple generations of abuse, neglect, and trauma themselves. If you don't have the ability to co-regulate with your child, if nobody's ever given that to you, you can't give it away. So if you're surrounded by a bunch of people that are like, that's enough, shut up, you're an idiot, get to your room, again and again and again, or if you're absent and able to provide feedback in that regard, you're blank. Babies just figure this out themselves and they go silent and they develop very little skills or they die. And they develop very little skills other than fight, flight, and freeze to get their needs met. And here's what's interesting about this. We are wired for connection. So a couple of generations ago, almost 3 now, my forefathers of psychology, the boys I like to call them, were sitting around trying to figure out this age-old question of how do we help kids be calm? Because we like it better when people are calm. We like it better when the children are calm. And so one of the fellas said to the other fella, Watson, he said to the other fella, Skinner, those are the boys, look what happens when you shock a rat. It stops doing the behavior you don't want it to do. Well, son of a gun. And then the other fellow said, oh, look at what I'm doing in my lab. Look what happens when you feed a pigeon colored water. When you reward it, it does more of the behavior. And essentially, since that time, behaviorism was donned, and we did this little thing called rewards and consequences to shape the behavior of children. Okay? Here's the hard part about it. Nobody asked the rat how he felt about the shocker guy. And in fact, what happened when we were establishing best practices around rewards and consequences is we didn't know we had to measure something that was already very inherent in the way that people interacted with each other 2 generations ago. There was one thing that has changed significantly that we didn't even know we had to measure back then. Guess what it was? Proximity to each other. Relationship. We are wired for connection, and compliance has so much to do with who is doing the punishing or the consequencing or the rewarding, way more than it has to do with the consequence or the punishment itself. In fact, I would have people say this to me all the time. You should have seen when my dad could have just looked at me like this, and I'd be like, oh my gosh. Now, I try to look at my kid, I go like this, and he's like, whoa! Kids these days are so disrespectful. Huh? They don't listen. Here's the issue. The biggest difference that we didn't know we had to measure was simply that of proximity. Think about the square footage of the house that your grandfather was raised in and the square footage of the house in which we raise our babies. What's the difference? There's a significant disconnect. And in fact, data is really fascinating around this. Our grandparents, great-grandparents, I would say, looked at their children 72% more of the time than we look at our children. Because in addition to expanding our square footages of our schools and our businesses and our houses, right? In fact, I texted my 11-year-old last night that it was supper time. He was in the basement. I was yelling, Asher, supper time. Doesn't count. Okay, so now I couldn't move my feet down the stairs. Oh no, because I'm tired. I'm exhausted. So I'm texting him. Yeah, and I don't even use words. I use emojis. Huh? A bowl of pasta, because that's what we're having. Glass of wine, because his mother's already into it. And then a running guy. Hurry up! It becomes really difficult to indicate to another that they matter when we are so disconnected. And what becomes so critical, so think about this, for example, the most dysregulated amongst us are like a kid with a temper tantrum. Okay, it's like a 2-year-old having a meltdown. Like if you've ever seen them, they are kicking, hitting, potentially screaming, biting, doing all the things. If you think sort of the worst of the worst that you've ever seen, what happens in that moment is, I think that we lose our capacity for any ability we have. Okay. So if you sit with your kid and you watch them maybe be kind to a sibling or use their words, or they're hanging out with grandparents or doing all those things, that's your kid, because they're regulated. Okay. They have access to everything you've ever taught them. Their words, their kindness, their empathy, their compassion, their memory, what your birthday, all those things. When they get dysregulated, what do they look like? If I take you to a 2-year-old with a temper tantrum, right? They sometimes even lose their language, right? If they had it before, they do. Yeah. And if you think about into adulthood, for sure adolescents, how many times are adolescents losing their minds? But also think about this into adulthood. Have you ever been in a bar fight? I'll tell you, one time I was, and I grew up in this town. Well, not grew up. I went to college in this town, and there was a drinking establishment there called Billy Bob's. And what's interesting in this process, if you've ever seen anybody in an adult fight, what happens is you can make an assessment on somebody's ability to be a good person, a partner, a friend. You can be somewhere and you get, like, having a nice conversation. You're maybe, having a drink, or you're having dinner. Maybe you're dancing. And then what does that very same person look like 30 minutes later when they get into a fight in a parking lot? The police are there. They're trying to hold two people back from getting upset with each other, whatever that looks like. This person who you were just considering, being a really nice person, maybe developing a relationship with in some way. Look at them. What do they look like? They're like, they don't even have their words. And if you ask them to dance in that heated exchange, they would have what? The ability to dance? No. You also can't tell somebody how to calm down. You have to show them. Can you imagine going up to this fella in the bar fight and being like, use your words, calm down? What's going to happen? They'll punch you, because they're in fight, flight, or freeze. They don't have access to their prefrontal cortex. And you can't, in the most heightened state of arousal as human beings, you can't tell somebody how to do it. You have to show them. And the more disconnected we become, we have less and less opportunities for showing. So we start telling, yeah. Now, this particular guy, if I take you back to the bar fight guy, has he lost his ability to speak? Has he lost his ability to dance, or to be kind, or to use his words when he is flipping his lid, when he's dysregulated? Has he lost those abilities for life? No! But he's lost access to those abilities. And just like our 2-year-old having a temper tantrum, or our 13-year-old slamming the door to their room and get out, I hate you, you're an idiot, never talk to me again. Have they lost access? Have they lost their ability to be kind and caring and use their words and be a productive member of society? No, it's not gone. They've lost access to it. And that's called emotional dysregulation. Now, here's the interesting thing about these times that we're in. There's 3 things that are on board when I think about, sitting with kids on a locked unit where there's security and kicking and hitting and telling me to, there's a lot of cuss words and F-offs and things happening. Some of the most dysregulated kids I've ever seen in my life, I know that these 3 things are on board, okay? When kids are really, really, really losing their minds. Uncertainty, fear, and no end in sight. Okay? Uncertainty, fear, and no end in sight. And I will tell you, even after 10 years on a locked psychiatric inpatient unit, I have since assessed and treated over 1,000 kids in this country. And I have never, not one time, met a bad kid. Not one single time. But I've met more and more, as my career advances, more and more emotionally dysregulated kids. And when you're emotionally dysregulated, you can't learn, even if you want to. When you are emotionally dysregulated, even with the finest pedagogical advances or the biggest consequences you can imagine, if a kid is dysregulated, if they have no access to language in particular, they cannot process language. If you can't produce it, you cannot process it. So when kids are really dysregulated or overwhelmed, it's not that they can't learn. It's not that they don't want to learn. They can't. Biologically speaking, they can't. And so here's what's interesting to me. So as I said to you, in this state we're in, parenting babies at the tail end, if you will, in all hopefulness of this pandemic, people say to me, has the pandemic affected our kids? Yes, exponentially. And I don't think we've even began to address it. And I'll tell you why. Here's the most dysregulated I've ever seen a kid. Uncertainty, fear, and no end in sight. Okay, that's what's on board. Think about the 3 components of a global pandemic. Uncertainty, fear, and no end in sight. So just a second, if those are the 3 components of the most dysregulated among us, for the last almost 2.5 years, we've been collectively as a globe in a bar fight. Yes. And what does somebody look like at the end of getting in a wicked tussle with somebody else? I will tell you, are they exhausted? Are they irritable? Where's their access to kindness and empathy and compassion? They've lost access to those things. They're chippy. Yeah. They get very divisive in their thinking, because I'll tell you, when we're overwhelmed, we lose our room for gray. We get very straight up down the middle. You're this or you're that. You're a masker or an anti-masker. Yep, you're not getting the needle. You're not coming to Christmas. There's no opportunity to sink in because our resources are so limited. Okay. That is evidenced by some things if we look at our interpersonal relationships across this country. In fact, across North America and in many European countries, divorce has increased by 30% since the beginning of the pandemic. Domestic violence and child maltreatment numbers have never been this high in the history of our respective lifetimes, careers. Now, why do we need to be concerned about that? Okay, so in our school systems, for example, if there are children who are 30% more of the time, generally speaking, going through a divorce, navigating disconnect from their primary caregivers, or our educator population are involved in very difficult relationships at home, it becomes very difficult to serve. Okay, so as a community now, we are like this. Yeah, and that's evidenced to, by the disconnect that's happening, the rise in mental health issues. In fact, highest rate of suicide right now in this country is middle-aged men. Because it's interesting to me, middle-aged men have the least amount of emotional language, the least amount of ability to stay connected to people, not because they don't feel it, but because for many generations, we've assumed that males and females take two very dichotomous roles. We provide a much more nurturing language to female identifying children or to anybody who falls on a more feminine spectrum, part of the spectrum, than we do to our males. I coach minor hockey in this town, and I can tell you 2 weeks ago, I heard things like this: you're skating like a girl. Boys don't cry, right? You're tough. Come on, get up. And when we lose this capacity to regulate our emotion, what becomes so critical is having an emotional language to explain to another what it feels like. I feel like a failure. I'm disappointed. I'm scared. I'm sad. Brene Brown in the Atlas of the Heart speaks about the fact that the vast majority of people that we work alongside and we have as our friends and that we sort of are raising in our communities have access to 3 descriptors of emotion: happy, sad, and pissed off. It becomes very difficult to regulate our emotion when we're feeling overwhelmed and disconnected if we have very little skill to name it or identify with another where it is. Okay? Because Dan Siegel said this, which I think is really interesting. He said, you have to name it to tame it. All right. So that's the soul ripping section. Okay, so there you have it. That is the part where I have successfully ripped your souls out. And now we're going to put it back together. So is it really bad? Yes. And I don't think that we have begun to see the cost yet, because I think we're still waiting for the next shoe to fall a little bit. We're talking often about the next wave, and we're often reporting results. Now we're talking about monkeypox, and pretty soon, then we get blindsided. That's a really bad word. We get hit with yet another crisis of epic proportions, like we did in Uvalde, just really being in this place in Texas, knowing that there are very much dysregulated people in the world that have the capacity to do difficult things. And again, it sparks tons of conversations around gun control and what that looks like. But when we are in a heightened state of arousal, right? When we are disconnected, when we are unseen by the people who are around us, we will turn up our behavior until it gets noticed. So I guess the question is then, coming up the other side for me, what is this process around, what is the answer to this all? How do we stay connected to the most disconnected among us? And I will tell you, there's something very wise in the concept of acknowledgement. And although I have used this most recently as the answer to everything, I understand and appreciate how simplistic it sounds, but I promise you it's the truth. The thing that we need to do in our communities today, now more than ever, is to slow down long enough to begin to look and see again. Because we have, for a very long time, particularly the last 2 years, stayed very much and worried about our physical and to some degree our own emotional safety, which makes us be very self-centered. We focus only on here and we forget that we're just walking each other home. We lose our resources. And I will tell you right now, I am so grateful to be alive in this season, primarily because, for this one reason, the bar is so low. Your ability to connect in your communities is so remarkably easy if you do it on purpose. Let me give you an example. And here's the two things I want you to tuck back into your back pocket between now and June. And I promise you, it'll make your communities better for it. Because what happens is we get into this place believing that there needs to be some senior leader, some grand policy procedure, do something about it from somebody on high that's going to come in and just make some magical policy. And all of us are going to be like, oh, there's the answer. Guess what? Not in our lifetimes is that going to be effective. Who is responsible for keeping our communities connected and healthier than they've ever been is you and me. Doing simply this, the next best, right, kind thing. Because even if we instantly, which honestly would be very helpful, initiating massive sweeping changes to gun control and gun access, for sure. What matters, I would argue, even more profoundly in this moment is how you and I re-recognize, I guess, our power to see each other. And I'll give you 2 examples of this. If you wave like you're drunk between now and the end of this school season at every stoplight and stop sign that you come across in the GTA, you will single-handedly reconnect your communities. I will give you an example of this. On the way in this small town, every time I drive here in the morning, when I take my kids to school, I wave like this at everybody I pass. Okay, now my personal husband, he's a farmer, as you remember, so his waves look like this. And if he's very excited to see me, I get a head nod too, like that, okay? How you do it doesn't matter. When you begin to address and acknowledge people in your community again, when you were doing this on purpose, what you notice is that people get regulated and engaged right back. So on the way to work here, there's 2 different cohorts. This is sort of like a bimodal distribution in this little town. There's the old fellers that came here to retire or just lived here their whole life and are retiring. And there's also a college, which means there's a lot of young bucks in town. Okay. So I'm driving to work in the morning and I have their kids and we often count how many times, people we can get people to wave. And when I'm waving like this, and I pass the old fellers on the way to the Legion for the coffee, I can just hear them, the old couple coming in and one says to Ethel, who is that waving? Oh, crazy. Like that. You're welcome, Ethel, because I single-handedly just regulated your partner on the way to coffee, right? When we start to look again and see, we spend less time in this heightened state of arousal because we get very present in the moment. And then what happens when I get close to the college is I give them the old wave and I can just hear the young fellows like, oh yeah, here she goes again, big kook, thinking she, You're right. I got it. I'll wave every chance I get it. Anybody who would say, because what we're doing is when we look and see, we start to walk people home through some of the hardest parts. And I will tell you this, you notice what happens when you buy coffee for somebody at the Tim Hortons line, behind you. When you give somebody a compliment, do not underestimate your power in these moments. And it will tell parents, tell you parents, if you're watching this and in terms of, your school divisions in this moment, your teachers more than anything need to know in this home stretch that they matter. A well-timed, genuine thank you, stopping by the bus driver, opening the door to the bus and just saying, thanks for getting my kid to school safely today. It can not only change a life, but it can save it. And I think right now, this level of disconnect is the biggest concern for me. So the answer really lies in this process of looking and seeing. And that, it really comes down to this word for me around acknowledgement. And I will tell you, I've learned very much the hard way, I would say, in the last little bit around truly what an acknowledgement means. And I grew up in this town, or in this province, in a very small town, as you know, called Viking, which is home of the Sutter brothers. And so if you watch NHL hockey, you know that 6 brothers come from, there's 7 brothers, and 6 play in the NHL from Viking, Alberta, Canada. So anyways, I was like a little bit of a big deal. I tried to marry one, but it didn't work out. So I had to make it on my own, but it's fine. Anyway, so what happens in this community is that still to this day, it's very white, straight, able-bodied, and I would argue racist. Certainly that's how I was raised. And in this privileged place where I had no idea my privilege, which is really truly the definition of privilege. And I, for the last, I can't even tell you, I got a PhD in this country, so I have no excuse. I'm a 46, almost 47-year-old woman. And I had no idea the history of this country. In fact, 3 years ago, I put orange shirts on my kids because everybody else was. I had to Google what the 60 scoop was. I had to, despite the fact that I serve for the majority of my career a very dysregulated population, particularly in our world of child and family services that are largely made up of Indigenous peoples, I had no idea why they were there to the disproportionate capacity that they are, disproportionate number that they are. And so I have also, for the last 5 years, spoke across this country. And so I would hear this word acknowledgement all the time. Okay. And in fact, quite honestly, when it came in the form of land acknowledgements, I would hear people say this: how many times do we have to do this? We've already apologized. Okay. Another land acknowledgement. Listen, I would hear people acknowledge the land in an attempt to acknowledge the land and butcher the names of the land on which they were trying to acknowledge because they couldn't take the time to learn how to say it properly. And it just really reminds me of this, imagine if your brother George was killed tragically next week, okay? And you gathered for their funeral, and the funeral director sort of gathered everybody around and brought out her paper and said, "We're here to remember Jorge." And everybody looked around and was like, "Who's Jorge?" Well, that's just how I say it. That's how I read it. Do you understand? The power of acknowledgement is something that I think all of us have in us. And I truly didn't understand the word until I sunk into the very grateful. I'm very grateful for the teachings of many Indigenous people who have taught me this. Here's the thing about a true acknowledgement. It is never a one-shot deal. Okay. This idea of how many times, it's never enough. It's not an apology, although our apologies are really helpful in repairing. Acknowledging another human being, as we are going to get reconnected in this disconnected world, really become resilient in relationships. It's not about apologizing. We do this all the time. We want to fix stuff. Sorry for your loss. Huh? Think about how ludicrous this sounds. Sorry for the cultural genocide. Are we good? Good. Now, I understand it because it's an attempt to fix. When there's dysregulation, when we understand the atrocities that have occurred, the children of our country, we go, "Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Okay, I want to fix it. I want to move on. I want to get it right," because I like that state of emotional regulation. What we miss is what is asked of so many of us when we're overwhelmed. Just see me. Just acknowledge it. Just notice this, right? When our kids are overwhelmed, what we try so hard to do is fix it. And we so often miss this step of just holding space. Tell me more. What's the hardest part? What am I missing? Those are 3 statements that tend to serve me so well as a mom, because I often want to jump to the fix. It's not an apology. It's not a one-shot deal when we're talking about acknowledgements, but I got to tell you this, the one thing it must be genuine. We have continually made, I think, an increasing mistake here these days, particularly post-pandemically, in just using acknowledgements disingenuinely. Thank you for your service. Oh, thank you. Everybody gets a friggin' water bottle. Woo! Okay, we're good. You're good. Thank you so much, teachers. You were good, right? Well, good. Well, everybody gets I don't know what you give away anymore, a pen maybe or something. Listen, what is so much more powerful is that when an acknowledgement is genuine, it carries so much more weight. When somebody stops by the school to look at you in the eye and say, thank you for holding my baby this year. I'm so glad they get to be back in person with you because we needed it. I needed it, right? Turns out we are so much better with other people's children most of the time. I wrote a best-selling book called Kids These Days, okay? One of the best books I've ever read, to be honest with you, about how to handle kids and emotions and parenting and teaching. If you watch me with my own personal children, you wouldn't buy the book because we tend to stay more regulated with other people's children, right? But then we often, I think assess our own parenting abilities when we're most dysregulated. That's not when we're at our best. It's our ability to stay regulated that matters. And so much about this happens in just the simple acknowledgement of each other. It's never a one-shot deal, not an apology, but it must be genuine. What happens to you if you're out frolicking in, trying to think about a suburb in Toronto, in like York, and somebody says to you, hey, Christina, can I talk to you for a second? And you're like, yeah, sure. Can I just tell you, I don't know what you're doing, Mama, but you're doing something right. I think your son is amazing. I just kind of thought you should know, you're just hanging out there at the hockey rink or soccer field, minding your own business. And somebody comes up to you, uses your name and says, I think your son's amazing. What happens to you? I will tell you what happens to you. First of all, you want to confirm they get the kid right because you don't want to lean into that and they'd be like, oh shit, sorry, somebody else. You say, his name is Evan? I would say, I know who Evan is. He was at my house yesterday. He's amazing. Listen, honestly, I want to tell you, I'm so grateful my kids are friends with your Ev because I think everybody needs a little more Evan in their world these days. Then what happens to you when somebody genuinely acknowledges your child? I will tell you two things. You lean in and your voice goes up a couple of octaves. Oh, thank you. I love your hoodie. Oh my, do you guys like to barbecue? Like what? This is how affairs start in minor hockey, P.S. I'm just joking, not really. Because when we're acknowledged, we rise. It's contagious. It's like a light. We all just want to know we matter, okay? It's not a one-shot deal. It's not an apology. And it must be genuine. So I will tell you that everything I'm creating for you tonight happened here on Treaty 7 territory, which is also known as the central part of this province called Alberta. It is the unceded territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy. It is made up of the Siksika, the Kainai, the Piikani, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda First Nation, and the Métis Nation Region 3. It is my privilege and my honor to raise my babies on a land where so much sacrifice was made before I ever got here. And if I truly want to understand the ask, when I use my privilege in this place, which I started on third base. I really did. And most of my job as a psychologist, as a parent in this community, as a hockey coach and a baseball coach, is to do a lot of the walking each other home in our communities. I'm going to be so much more connected to your kid than mine, even on my worst days. And I'll give you this example. If you say to me tonight, listen, I'm not going to be able to get to practice on time. Can you'd say to me, can my daughter come over to your house after school? And I would say, yes, send her over. Yes. So your daughter comes through my door at the end of the day, right? We know of each other, obviously, and I'm going to take her to practice and do other things. And she comes through the door and she says to me, hey, slams the door. What's for supper around here? Now, I'm going to know that typically your daughter isn't like this. And so I'm going to say, hey, honey, good to see you. Listen, I got lots of choices for supper. What do you feel like, honey? Are you doing okay? Now, if my own personal child walks through the door like that, slams the door, says to me, hey, what's for supper around here? Excuse me? What? Get your backpack. Don't you speak to me like that. What is happening? And in my head, I'm like, oh my God. He got Uncle Mark's jeans. He's going to jail. I should have married his father. All the things start panicking through my head. And so I get dysregulated and I want to get this baby fixed. And I forget to wonder just what the heck is going on. Now, is this behavior appropriate, acceptable? No, none of those things. That's not what I'm arguing. I need to get him back to a state of regulation first, and then I teach. Okay. We make a big mistake these days of trying to figure out how we get kids regulated versus rewarding them for behavior and just not allowing them to learn how to do things right. There's probably 5 things that I think when I think about making our babies as resilient as they need to be in these moments. And it really comes down to this idea of looking and seeing. Because again, when you're acknowledged, you rise. On purpose, genuinely connecting to them one time a day. If you've got 30 seconds or you've got 30 minutes or an hour, it doesn't matter. It's about doing it on purpose. And often it means leaning into the things that they love the most. Despite the fact that you are not into Minecraft in this moment, that you would much rather do anything than friggin' learn about another tower in Minecraft, if that is something that is exciting to them, lean into it with your whole heart. If Fortnite is the thing, strap on the headset, learn the things. If you have a middle-aged kid at any capacity, you better friggin' learn how to TikTok, okay? You show me. You should see me. Huh? I want you to ask the question how many times you belly laugh with your babies, because the most accessible parts of you happen when you're experiencing joy. Joy is the most vulnerable emotion on the planet. And the more dysregulated, the more disconnected we become, the more we lose access to joy. Okay. And I think what is so critically important in this process is in this moment, we remember leaning into this process of lighting up around the things that they love, looking into the eyes as much as we possibly can. There are many cultural differences around eye contact, but just know that these are the window to the soul. And what is universal across cultures is navigating the emotional response of other people. I do that typically when I look and I see. Even with our children who are on the autism spectrum, eye contact is made often for emotional safety or physical safety. And so pay close attention to when kids are not looking. I will tell you, if you think about anybody who is anxious or depressed among us, where are their eyes? If you've ever been in a state of grief or mourning, where are your eyes? If you think about adolescence, one of the trickiest times for our kids, where's their hair? Where's their hoodies? And I think sometimes it's really about this ability to look and see, okay? Because when you're acknowledged, you rise. The last thing that I think is really critically important to remember is when I need to get a lid back on, when I need to get kids regulated, one of the biggest connecting factors is 2 things. Can I get in close proximity of them? And you think about sometimes the best talks you've ever had with your kids, often in your vehicle. Let's go for a drive, right? They're locked in, which is really helpful. But also, if you can do that and have a snack on board, because you can't chew and swallow with a flipped lid. It's biologically impossible. You will die. You have to be somewhat regulated. And so when my own kids, and when I've ever been, in a unit that somebody has just lost their mind, even if they're being inappropriate or unacceptable, I would say, let's get a drink of water. I hate water. Do you have juice? Now listen, if I had access to juice, I'd get you the juice. But if I don't, I might say things like, you know what, honey, I wish I did, but this is all I have right now. Right? Can I get you a glass of water? Fine. If I can get them to swallow, I'm getting regulated quicker. Okay. So sometimes if I can go for a drive, talk about hard things, let's go grab a Slurpee, let's go get an ice cap. Sometimes building in those 15 minutes once every other week can make the difference in sort of knowing and seeing. So my friends, I know that was a bit of a quick hour. I think we are going to make some time for question and answer. So I would invite, I think, Ed, Christina, I think you were both going to pop back on with me here for a little bit. If we have some time for questions, I would be happy to do that. But thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for having me. I'm going to, as we navigate any questions, I'm just going to share with you a little bit of a way that you can stay connected to my team way over here in Alberta. And I'm going to see if I can make that happen. Now, this is always a trick. even after this pandemic, you would think that I could do this so much better, but I still don't know what I'm doing. So if there's any questions in there, just shoot them my way, and I will get this up for you.
Actually, Jody, I do have a question for you. With regards to uncertainty, parents often tell their children nothing because they think it's better than the truth. Do you think they should always be told the truth even when it's difficult?
Yes. Yes. And here's the question that I often get, particularly around a mass shooting, for example, or the pandemic, or having open conversations around gender identity, figuring out the hard questions of development. If we don't talk about it, I don't want to get them upset. I don't want to. Funerals are another really good thing. People ask me this all the time. Should we take kids to funerals, right? We don't want them to see mom and dad cry. We don't want them to be worried about us. And all of those things are really well intentioned because we want to protect our children. But here's the issue. We don't have a script how to handle hard things. You can't tell anybody how to do it. You got to show them. And I often think about this, with our own kids. And so my twins are 9 and our oldest is 11. They're inundated by social media examples of what happened in Texas. They are aware of what's happening in the Ukraine. They are having conversations on the playground with grade 3 brains or grade 8 brains, and they're making stuff up themselves. You know what I heard? The shooter did this, and we better do lockdown. And you know what? I would rather say, you don't have to tell them what you know. The most insightful conversations often happen like this. Hey, did you hear about what happened in a school in Texas? Yes. What did you hear? Tell me more. Do you have any questions about it? Right? What is the hardest part? And we get so nervous about how we would explain it to kids. And oftentimes it's about ask them questions. And so I would we're not arguing, but I would say, Christina, that developmentally appropriate becomes much more, important. But at the risk of anything, I would much rather talk, invite the conversation again and again and again. And sometimes, the best time to have conversations. And if you've ever been a parent or an auntie or an uncle, bedtime tends to be, no matter whether you're 5 or you're 25, to sit with a parent at bedtime. And if, you just sort of poke your head in and the lights are off and you grab their feet at the end of the bed and just say, you doing okay? Anything on your mind tonight before we sign off? And here's the problem. When they get into adolescence, they're usually asleep, or we're usually asleep before they are. But it's really this idea of providing that opportunity. And I say that to educators all the time. They've said, should we talk about what happened in Texas in our classrooms this week? Yes. And not because I need you to invoke an opinion. I want you to invite the regulation, the dysregulation in the room. Make sense?
Completely. Yeah.
Okay.
Dr. Jody, I just wanted to chime in very quickly. I just wanted, as you were talking today, by the way, an excellent presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I was able to relate personally to a lot of what you were saying. One of the things that I always tell my wife is that in the role that I have as the principal of a high school, is I'll often I'll have a smile on my face through the day, and I'll have the patience of Job as I go through my day. But when I get home, that's when my smile is wiped off my face, and that's where my patience is very thin. And I just wanted to thank you for reminding us that we need to reconnect. We need to reconnect with our own children at home, how very important it is. Because as you mentioned, going through the pandemic, there is a lot of uncertainty. And thank God we're at the tail end of the pandemic, because I think we're all quite tired of having to wear masks. I know that we have at the York Catholic District School Board a reentry plan that continues to be very fluid and continues to change on a regular basis. And so we've got to make sure that we are updated as far as what the policy and protocol is of the month, of the week, of the day even. So I can just imagine our kids feeling, as you mentioned, the uncertainty, the fear that there's no end in sight. And we need to ground ourselves as individuals. We need to, as you said, we, the big people, have to be okay in order for the little people to be okay. And it's so important to be able to reconnect with our own children at home. And I'll often take that perspective whenever I'm giving advice to parents when they come in. And it's really funny because sometimes my wife will say, "You mean you're giving advice to parents? You are giving advice to parents?" And yeah, that's me. And sometimes she's surprised that I'm doing that, but here I am doing the best I can. So I've got to remember to be doing that. And so many things that you mentioned today as well, how to not underestimate the power of our words and our actions. And I'll say to kids all the time how so important it is to be able to, you don't know what somebody's day is like, you don't know what they're going through, and how a simple smile or a wave, as you often do, how that will just make that person's day. And Saint Mother Teresa, one of her quotes, was, and one of my favorites is that every time you smile at someone, it's an action of love, and it's a gift to that person. And it's a most beautiful gift. A simple smile can just make someone's day. So thanks for reminding us about that, to genuinely connect with our kids, to spend time doing what they enjoy doing, because how important it is that we take our time, not only at work and have the patience of Job at work with our coworkers, with our students, but when we get home with our families, because families are what it's all about.
I agree. And I think, Ed, I would just add that, we feel when we're overwhelmed and exhausted, parents ask me this all the time, if I give my heart and soul at work, if I'm a teacher or a psychologist, or, I have to deal with people all day long, how in the heck do you expect me to be home and do this as well? And I think what's really critical in this season of heightened arousal is that we give ourselves the gifts a few times a day. Again, doing that on purpose, the reconnecting here, because we make a big mistake. You need to do self-care too. Like, are you drinking your kale and going for your run, and did you do some yoga today? Like, when do you think I'm going to do that? So it's simple for me these days with our 3 kids is I often think about just simply this: drop my shoulders, wiggle my toes, relax my jaw, and let my gut out. If I can do that 4 or 5 times a day in the run of my day, and I put even a reminder on my phone, what that does from a neurophysiological perspective is it drops my cortisol. And it gives my body a bit of a break so that when I come home and the first thing I see is my baby's backpacks strung across, and I'm like, "What is your backpack?" And the kids are like, because we live here, And again, this when we work outside the home, and it's a job. I'm so grateful to serve the children of this community, and I love them dearly, and I cannot wait to see what they become. But if I'm not okay when I go home, I will not be able to serve them. And it is an honor and a privilege to be able to do that. I am a walker because I'm in a position of privilege, and I got to be able to look after the people I wake up with, then my teams first, the people I work alongside in this office, your staff in the staff room, get the eyes, and then the people you serve, in that order.
Well put. Thank you.
And I just want to thank you as well. I think I always try and make time for my kids, and I put my phone away. And, we have this rule: the phone doesn't come to the dinner table, even when we want to look up something that happened.
I'm the worst. I say to them, "Don't have your phones." And then I'm like, and they bust me every time. They're like, "Get your phone." I'm like, I just need to see if the new season is here. Okay. Because your mother needs to learn how to launder money in the meantime. Okay. Because I think that's true. Right. And again, I think we are so hard on ourselves for giving our kids screen time. And I really think we need to have grace, because right now it's like, don't feel guilty about that. Right? Because again, it is very much a part of their lives and ours right now. But I want you to really think about disconnecting to reconnect on purpose, even if it's 5 minutes. You don't need to iPads off for you just lost your iPads for 2 weeks because we're going to get healthy. Everybody goes mad. All you need is to be able to, tonight on purpose, 5 minutes. Everybody, let's have a game of Uno. Yeah. Right now, we're going to sit and watch a period of the hockey. I know it's hard. Then everybody, you can go back on devices, whatever you choose in your house. But I think sometimes we get so scared that we're wrecking our children that we just cut it all off, and then everybody's mad and nobody's talking to each other anyway, So give yourself some grace in that regard. But it's right. Doing it on purpose, I think, is so critically important.
So, Dr. Jody, we do have a comment here from Mr. Betalana. He says that you're awesome, but he's an Alberta boy, born and raised in Calgary, but he's not a big Oilers or Elks fan, and so he's going for Calgary there. Go Flames, go Stamps. But he's got a question with regards to how do we support and help our kids who, after 2 years of being in COVID mode, are now preparing for post-secondary and what's to come.
Yes. And great question. And I want to tell you it's going to be okay, but I really do have significant concerns about it. And at the end of the day, will they adapt? Oh my goodness. The most malleable part of the brain is 0 to 2. Okay. And after that, only close second to that is adolescence. So your brain is not fully developed till it's 25. So we have got, and in some cases a little bit older than that. So we have got lots of opportunity to sort of make up that ground. But again, I really think that doing that on purpose matters. Having those expectations about leading by example. How are we engaging and really sort of taking the time to, not even if you don't do it with your own kids, notice the best friends of your children. Hey, I like your hoodie. You guys come over for dinner. Let's do this here. Absolutely. You know what? I'm going to drive you guys to the game tonight. I mean, I know you want to drive your, think about, this is why I will coach minor sport for the rest of my years, because some of the best conversations are when you're driving 5 kids who are all playing on a hockey team or 15 or 13. They're having conversations like this. No, wait, Grayson. Oh, I think your fallopian tubes are in your neck. When you are in the front seat of the car and you hear that conversation, this is beautiful. Because then you have the ability to be like, you know what, fellas? We're going to have a chat when we get out of this baseball game today. And the more proximity we put ourselves in with our children, the more we hear. Yeah. And so I'm a huge fan, again, of what we missed in so much of that process, Ed, is school sports. If you think about how much access you had to students as teachers, you're the eyes on. Right. When we think about child maltreatment, teachers are the first line of defense in this way. And I don't mean defense, of noticing when families are struggling, because you can kind of say, hey, I noticed, your babe's been late for 5 days. When we've had no access for 2 years, we are a major component in our education system of being a part of our family systems. The teachers of my children this year are some of the people I love the most in their days. And when they give me a call and say, the school calls, and I have twins, and the school calls, and I don't even say hello anymore. I just say, which one? And the couple of times when people say to me, Mr. Seeley is one of the best teachers on the planet, he said, Jode, I'm not calling about anything. You know what I'm calling to tell you? Evan was amazing today. I just thought you should know that I feel so lucky to have that little boy in my class. And you know what I want to do? I want to buy Mr. Seeley a whiteboard. I'm gonna get him a Chromebook. I mean, I love Mr. Seeley because he took the time to recognize, me and being able to remind me that I'm doing okay with my babies, because I question it, as does every parent who walks through the threshold of any school, whether they're doing okay. So it's that capacity that I would really call your parents to do as well. Don't forget the importance of writing a note in the agenda, to the principal, to the EA, to the bus driver, to sending a little note in a high chew candy. Here, you might need this today because my son's spicy. We were watching Stranger Things till 2 a.m. I didn't mean it. I don't know how we got into the 6th episode, but I'm sorry. How do we sort of stay and acknowledge each other in this way? And, again, you got me thinking about Mother Teresa. One of my favorite things that she's ever said is our only job is to cast a stone. We're not going to be so good that we can undo systemic oppression. We're not going to be so good that we can fight this mental health battle on our own. You cast a stone. You do the next best right kind thing. Do not feel responsible for your communities because you're not that good. I actually thought I was that good one time at the Children's Hospital. I thought single-handedly I was going to change the world. That's not, we're not that good, nor should we put that responsibility on our shoulders as leaders or as parents. Our job is to cast a stone, to do the next best right kind thing. So if you wake up tomorrow and your only job is to wave like you're drunk in the drop-off lane because you want to get the eyes of the supervisor and the parent, and you do this and you look at the bus driver and you go like, you have now set the tone on that day. Huh? And the one thing I did at post the school shooting, the first day our babies got back into school, is I got out of my car and the kids are like, don't walk me in. And I was like, you go, I'm here for your teachers, babe. And I grabbed the kindergarten teacher. I mean, which is a bit scary in COVID times, but I said, can I give you a hug? And there was tears that day, because at our elementary school, it was just like what those teachers experienced. And so the trauma that is very palpable for our educators right now is they're scared. Can we keep our babies safe? Right. And when we acknowledge it, when we address it, we say, come on. Thank you. Thank you for taking this, for hanging on to our most precious souls every day. We can step back into the classroom with a little bit more connection, and we're looking and we're seeing and we're noticing. And that's all we need right now.
And that's something that we really do appreciate. I received an email, and a lot of the times, of course, you can imagine that in my role, I'll get a lot of parents that are calling about this complaint or that complaint. They're not happy about this teacher, or they're just not happy about the amount of work their kids might be getting, et cetera, et cetera. So I received an email, and it was a very generous and complimentary email with regards to we've got the High Performer Athlete Program here at our school. And this parent was so appreciative of the wonderful work that our teachers do for her daughter, who is out of region. She's not within the region. So she arrived to our school, as many of our athletes do, out of region, not knowing anybody. And so the challenge is, of course, as you enter into high school from elementary school, every parent's concern is, how will my kid adapt? And if they don't have the friends coming in from elementary, it makes it all that more difficult. So her email was so complimentary and kind and generous. It made my day. And I shared that with my staff. And I think that we need those pick-me-ups every now and again. And I remember as a teacher, and I don't mean to kind of tout my own horn, but I do recall making an effort to call parents up and say, listen, you know what? Jody did a fantastic job. She did she wrote a great test. She's really coming along much better. She's answering questions. And you're right. It just makes the parent's day. Like, why not just take time to compliment? And we've got to always remember and ground ourselves to be able to do that, and ground others, like you say. So like Jody, your kids, I'm sure, are spectacular. They're great kids. By the way, do I get a Chromebook for saying that?
It's in the mail. It's in the mail.
I need a whole new set. No, but no, it's so important. And so, geez, thanks very much for bringing that forward, because we all need those pick-me-ups.
Thanks for having me. This was such an honor. I've spoke very little in Toronto these days. And when I've spent a lot of time in your beautiful city, but when you asked if we could make this happen tonight, I was so grateful for that opportunity. So thank you for letting me sit with your parents, and thank you both for the amazing work you do. It was an honor to sit with your people tonight.
No, thank you very much from the Catholic School Council. I think you've given us so many tools today to just let us go forward with just so much more optimism. Really small changes, I think, can make a really big difference. And that's something that I got from today. So I want to thank you for showing us that and for sharing that with us.
And I want to thank Mr. Batalana as well, and his lovely wife, for helping us put this together on YouTube. This will be available for parents to view for the next couple of weeks. So Dr. Jody, on behalf of our parent council, Christina Salteri, who did a phenomenal job in bringing you on board. Thank you, Christina, for all your diligent work, and certainly for our Catholic School Council, and on behalf of the entire Holy Cross Catholic Academy community. Dr. Jody, thank you very much for your time, for sharing your wisdom and expertise. Much appreciated. And boy, I really got a lot out of this, out of our presentation today, out of your presentation. So thank you very much. And we got to always remember, and I was going to mention your quote back there, we're all just walking each other home. So let's always remember that, one another. Dr. Jody, God bless you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.